Well, hello, everyone. My name is Henry Rogers. I'm the Executive Director of the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. And I want to thank you all for joining us today for a virtual discussion with California Air Resources Board member, Mr. Hector De La Torre. Now, before beginning today's event, I'd like to thank a few people and organizations who have made today's event possible. The HAIC 2021 Board of Directors, many of whom are here today, our 2021 Board President, Ms. Kat Janowitz, and our 2021 Programs Committee member who have organized our recent programs discussion. They're doing a fantastic job. Thank you. Now, we have some generous sponsors I obviously want to recognize as well. The Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, P2S Inc., SoCal Gas, Mitsubishi Cement Corp., Jacobson Pilot Services, World Oil, BYD, Moffitt and Nickel, Pacific Harbor Line, LIUNA Local 1309, PBF Energy, the Western States Petroleum Association, the Center for International Trade and Transportation at Cal State University, Long Beach. Now, to introduce our speakers today, I'm going to start with our very own Ms. Frances Keeler. Frances Keeler is the Vice President of the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, CEEB. Having joined the Council in April 2019, Frances is long familiar with CEEB's project work. Frances leads the South Coast Air Project as a project manager with additional responsibilities and strategic management across all CEEB projects. Frances brings to CEEB many years of experience working across California's environmental policy and regulatory issues. Most recently, as a senior counsel at Clyde & Co., she represented industrial energy shipping companies before multiple regulatory entities, including air pollution control agencies, the California Air Resources Board, the California States Land Commission, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She has extensive experience in state and federal Clean Air Acts, district, state, and federal regulatory development, permitting, credit trading, global climate change, and environmental compliance auditing. Prior to her private sector law background, Frances led numerous positions at the South Coast Air Quality Management District, including positions in enforcement and district council. Frances has been involved in the development of air quality management plans and rules that implement the plan, has extensive experience in permitting and compliance issue, and has been actively involved in the state and federal programs. She has held numerous leadership roles in environmental and community capacities, including the CSU Maritime Foundation, Future Ports, Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, and the Harbor Association of Industry and Commerce. Now, Mr. Hector De La Torre has served in the California State Assembly from 2004 to 2010, representing the largely Latino district in Southeast LA County. He chaired the Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, the Rules Committee, and helped create and chair the Accountability and Administrative Committee during his tenure. Mr. De La Torre was the executive director of the national nonprofit Trans-America Center for Health Studies. Prior to his service in the Assembly, he served as mayor and as a member of the Southgate City Council, judicial administrator for the Los Angeles County Superior Court, chief of staff to Deputy Secretary of Labor in the Clinton administration, and was a teacher at Edison Junior High in South Los Angeles. Hector graduated with a bachelor's degree in diplomacy and world affairs from Occidental College and attended the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. He lives in Southgate with his wife and 3 children. Hector, Frances, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Henry. It's a pleasure to be here. So we'll go ahead and just get started. Hector, welcome, and thank you for joining us again this year to continue our conversation about the Air Resources Board and those programs that affect us, those of us that are in the ports and in the Harbor Association. And a lot has happened over this last year, so we're just going to try to hit some of the highlights today.
Thank you for the invitation. I always enjoy talking goods movement.
Well, we're always happy when our officials that are setting rules and regulations join us and are willing to come in and listen to what we have to say. So thanks again. You noted last year that you are the speaker's appointee. Could you just refresh people, or for the people that are just joining us today, what that means, and does that mean you vote on these rules and regulations?
Absolutely. So the board consists of mostly gubernatorial appointees, and that group, about half of them are technical experts. So we have a lawyer, we have an agriculture person, we have a transportation person, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other half are air district representatives from the different regions of the state. So we have a South Coast representative, we have a San Diego area representative, we have a Central Valley representative, a Bay Area representative, and a Sacramento area representative. And then there are two legislative appointees that are myself and Dean Flores. So we are appointed by the leaders of each of the houses, the Senate and the Assembly, but we are full members of the board. We vote, so once we're all on there, we're all the same.
All right.
There are two ex officio members who are sitting current legislators. We have a senator and an assembly member, although the Senate seat is vacant right now. Bill Monning retired from the legislature. But Eddie Garcia from the Imperial Valley is the assembly appointee. They are ex officio, meaning they participate in all of our meetings. They speak up, etc., but they cannot vote. You cannot have executive branch and legislative branch mixed. So they are there, they participate, but they cannot vote. But I can, and so can my Senate appointee colleague on the board. Another interesting thing that's happened since we last talked is there's been a lot of changes on the board. We have a new chair, Leanne Randolph, who came from the PUC. So she's new to CARB and new to being chair, obviously. And then we have three new board members who were appointed by the governor, one in the Bay Area, one in the Central Valley, and one from South Coast. For our local person, Judy Mitchell, who many of you know, and she's been around for a long time. She was a councilwoman on the PV Peninsula. She left the city council, which means she left the AQMD. And so Gideon Krakoff, who is a current board member at the AQMD, replaced.
Right, and so the governor looks at the makeup of the obviously district boards, and he chooses one of those current members of the district board to be on the Air Resources Board.
Yes, it can't be just a random person. It has to be a person who is on one of the air district boards.
Right, and something to note too that's just a little bit different is these new appointees are in fact fairly new to their other positions too. So Davina Hurt, who's from the Bay Area Air District, and Gideon Krakoff from the South Coast that you just mentioned, have not been in their board positions that long.
None of the three, I mentioned Leanne didn't come from CARB, but none of the three regular board members that were just appointed have been at their air districts longer than a year. So they are still, it's reasonable to assume, learning their position at the air district. And now on top of that, they're going to be representing that air district and learning CARB. So it's a very steep learning curve. I can tell you it took me a year to 2 years to figure things out at CARB. And I had been in the legislature and had voted on things that impacted CARB, and I looked over their budget, and it's still quite a different experience to actually be on the board because it does so much. The breadth of issues that we manage is tremendous. And we have cycles, regulatory cycles of different aspects, and I'm sure we'll be talking about some of them today. And they come up every few years. So you don't appreciate it when you're starting that you're voting on something and you're going to pass some regulation. And in 3, 4, 5 years, you're probably going to come back and revisit that and update those regulations. And until you've been through a couple of those cycles, it's really hard to grasp that you don't have to do everything now.
Yeah.
that there is going to be another opportunity in a few years to revisit those issues.
Yeah, and I think I was pleasantly surprised because I did watch the last Air Resources Board meeting. All of those are available online. You can access those. But I was pleasantly surprised at how well the newer district board members to the ARB had studied those issues and tried to be actively participating in the meeting. Now, I know you've only had one meeting with all of the folks together, and I'm sure you've had other discussions, just to get to know folks behind the scenes a bit. So do you see things, anything in policy that might be changing at the Air Resources Board simply because of this turnover? Or is it too early?
I think it is too early, but one thing that I've noticed that actually picks up on a trend that I saw last year is a real interest in wanting to address equity issues, environmental justice. That was something that started last year. In a couple of the issues that we took up, there was a consensus that we needed to do more in these impacted communities. And I certainly saw it a month ago in that board meeting, and certainly coming from every one of the new members. It was a theme that ran through that meeting, and I expect that that's going to be the case going forward. The one thing I think that everyone should appreciate is the CARB board is extremely collegial and collaborative. Most of the things, if you saw this at the end of the measures that we voted on, the comments from the board members tend to be similar or around the same types of issues, and that's completely organic because we can't talk to each other before the meetings. So I have always been impressed at CARB that whether it's the previous members or the current members, that we pick up on the same things in general. And when we want to tweak something, a staff proposal, it tends to be the same issues that catch our attention and that we want to make adjustments to. So I expect that will continue with the board. I have, from what I saw last month, I don't expect any difference from how it's worked in the past and how people really take this seriously, regardless of where they're from and their ideology. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. The consensus is usually there.
And of course, those Brown Act restrictions that keep you and your fellow colleagues on the Air Resources Board from discussing these issues beforehand or in serial kind of meetings. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. But that does not restrict you from meeting with multiple stakeholders, whether industry or public, and that.
Yeah.
So
it does not apply. It does not apply to external folks. It only applies internally. So we can talk to anybody on staff. We cannot. There's a limit to who we can talk to on the board.
Right.
So you cannot have basically a preordained result that is done behind the scenes. It has to be done out in the open at that meeting. But I have an open door policy, always have since I've been on the board, and we'll meet with anybody anytime. I think most of my colleagues are the same. It's much easier, of course, now with this, where you don't have to physically, drive somewhere and get together. The only caveat, or it's not even that, it's just, something important that people need to know. We have to report everybody we meet with. So we do have a staff person at CARB who schedules us, and that's not meant to be a gatekeeper situation. It's just they keep track of it. Otherwise, I'd have to keep track of it, and I'd mess something up, and that wouldn't be a good thing for anyone. So we do keep track of all these meetings, and there are monthly reports that are submitted with who we all met with in anticipation of a board meeting and the topics that are going to be discussed, or anything else. It doesn't have to be something that's agendized.
So they know you're here. So. All right. So in the South Coast Air Basin, a major issue for the Air Quality Management District is obtaining near-term emission reductions. But CARB has been actually pushing for zero emission technologies, which are still a little ways off. And unfortunately, to the exclusion, it seems, of others, providing support for things like renewable natural gas, which is here now, that can get us near-term reductions. So the district believes that you need to recognize and fund other emission reduction strategies in order to obtain these near-term reductions to meet the state and federal air quality standards. Do you think that the change in board members may help influence CARB strategies to obtain these near-term reductions?
Well, first of all, I would say that we do not support those near zero technologies. There are some of our funding programs that subsidize and provide incentives for near zero. Not all of them. Some of them are just for zero emission only in the heavy duty sector. But we do have some that do allow for near zero, and they've been taken up. There have been many trucks that have been purchased, near zero trucks that have been purchased with CARB incentive dollars. That being said, on a going forward basis, yes, zero is the endpoint. Zero is where we want to be. And we are seeing a lot of activity in the zero heavy duty space. Volvo has started releasing their heavy duty. There are about 8 manufacturers, name brand manufacturers, that will have their trucks for sale this year or next. I think it's 3 or 4 this year, and then another 4 or 5 next year. So all of them will be available in the next 2 years at zero emission, whether it's battery electric or fuel cell hydrogen. So this year we will be doing our final iteration of our mobile source strategy for the state. We did a hearing on this in the fall, as you'll recall. So we gave feedback on that, and the final iteration will be coming back to the board and will be made public. And that comprehensive discussion will include near-term actions that CARB is planning to take to achieve needed reductions. So we hear it. We're going where we're going. So it's just a matter of what the transition time is like, and what we're going to support in the meantime. Some of our funds are directly committed to zero emission, but not all. And for the short term, we do have both. The other important thing to note is, and I talked about this in the fall, in August, the board voted on our NOx reduction plan, and that was a near zero plan, lays out over the next few years the reductions that have to happen, whether it's diesel or natural gas. The ultra low NOx standard that we set is going to drive those trucks to be even cleaner in the short term. And we will, again, for the life of that transition, we'll be having incentive dollars for near zero. But again, I want to reiterate, we want to get to zero as near as we can. And it's an incentive actually beyond the truck itself. And I think I may have said this previously, I say it all the time. Zero gets you off our backs. It gets us off your backs. So, we at zero, we don't. The Air Resources Board has nothing to do with you, right? You're emitting zero. So, besides the benefits of the vehicle on a day-to-day basis, there's a regulatory certainty to a zero emission truck that you don't get with anything else. That we will not have anything to do with you. We won't be regulating you beyond. There's not going to be an ultra zero down the road where with near zero, we are going to continue to ratchet down because that's what we do. So.
Understood. But we also see, obviously there's a lot of factors that go into getting to zero emissions, and it's going to require a lot of cooperation between agencies and cities and counties and everyone else to ensure that the transition is holistic. We need to make sure that we have sufficient reliable power generation to support your mandates as well as everyone else's. When you look at some of the other districts are going into decarbonization of buildings, and cities and counties are doing that. So that these put a huge demand on the infrastructure. But you also have to have raw materials for battery production, which we know is a lot of those raw materials, the metals, come from China, which makes us dependent on foreign governments. And then treatment of waste is also a big issue, that as you see batteries can no longer be used, or as battery technology advances, you're going to have waste batteries, whether it's what's in them, the chemicals or the housings themselves, different parts of them. Solar panels have a limited life too, and then need replacement. And we need to look at that. And we also want to make sure we are not exporting our emissions. So we don't want to have to say, okay, we don't have battery recycling, so it's got to go out of state. What have we really accomplished? We're now taking that, putting it in someone else's backyard. So what is CARB doing? Are you working with the CEC and others to make sure we have that transition? And could you explain that a little?
Absolutely. We have a number of efforts going on simultaneously with other agencies. Governor's office is the heart of the multi-agency work that's underway on all of this transition. They're the ones who kind of bring us all together, so we're talking to each other and make sure that all of those issues that you described are being in the collective. It does no good for CARB to be off in one corner doing our thing and some of the other agencies doing their own thing. We do work with our sister agencies, the California Energy Commission, the PUC, to make sure that the infrastructure is there. In fact, the Energy Commission has committed nearly $100 million per year for alternative fuels and electric vehicle charging incentives. The PUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, has committed to spending over $600 million in the next few years to complete the grid improvements and upgrades to make sure that we are in a place to do to supply the energy for all of this. That would be through obviously the utilities in California. Even the non-shareholder-owned utilities, investor-owned utilities, are copying some of this. Sometimes they're in the lead, sometimes they're following, but they're all doing the same kinds of efforts, and we're well aware of those and interacting with them. In fact, I just talked to Southern California Edison recently, and within the last week, and all of last year, they had requests for infrastructure to support the equivalent of 50 trucks, zero-emission battery electric trucks, all of last year. In the first quarter so far, in the first 2 months, they've already had the equivalent requests for 130 trucks. So the that's something we're driving. It's happening by probably some of the folks that are on this call today that are wanting to make the transition and are engaging with the utilities to get that infrastructure available for them and their vehicles. In terms of the batteries and the raw material, first of all, you know, the internal combustion engine has a lot of stuff that's left over and a lot of recycling that needs to take place there. You know, tires, we still haven't figured out what to do with tires that we have, not just here in California, but across the border in Mexico. Those tires kind of go back and forth across the border, and occasionally you'll have these fires. And I mean, it's just, it's something we have not resolved from what we have currently. Going forward, we have the advantage that we can think ahead, that we do know this issue comes up, and that we do know it's something we have to address on the front end. And so there's a company called Redwood Materials that are doing lithium ion recycling. So that the market is creating solutions that we want to be supportive of. In terms of the supply of the raw materials, Lithium Valley is something that the state is really excited about. In the geothermal area around the Salton Sea, we already are getting the brine from that geothermal energy. It comes up with the geothermal gases, and the only question is, how do you get the lithium out of the brine?
Yeah.
And there is the way the Chinese do it, and some others. It's very labor intensive, very expensive, damages the environment. But there are some patented new technologies by some companies that are based down in the Imperial Valley that are very, very promising. If these patented technologies are successful, then you get rid of the environmental damage, and we have the supply. The brine is there. So if we can successfully scale up the conversion of that brine into lithium, we will be able to have the major lithium supply in the United States, right here in California. So it's very, very promising. But I don't want to just focus on lithium, because there are some very promising technologies with solid state batteries, which may be even more efficient and more effective than going forward. Currently, they're too expensive, but there may be breakthroughs there in the next 5, 10, 15 years that would make lithium batteries obsolete. And we could skip forward to something that would hold a charge longer, last longer, etc. So we're looking at everything. We want to keep all options open on a going forward basis, so that this transition to zero is as effective as possible, and that as much as possible, because California is driving a lot of this, that the economic activity is here in California, that the benefit in terms of jobs, in terms of revenue and innovation is happening right here.
And I have to say, when you mentioned, you know, trucks or the tires coming in and out of Mexico, and that, it actually gives me that thought of interstate commerce, and are we disadvantaging, you know, California businesses by pushing the electric when you have to allow out-of-state trucks that are not electric into California? You know, is CARB looking at that economic?
Yeah. Absolutely, and we differentiate. I want to be clear. Everything I'm talking about right now is drayage. So the governor's executive order back in the fall was the thing that got all the attention was passenger vehicles would have to be zero emission by 2035, new ones. You could keep yours if you have one
Right.
internal combustion engine, but brand new vehicles would only be zero emission starting in 2035. He also had in that same executive order a similar mandate that all drayage trucks sold in California would have to be zero emission by 2035. And so we are very much focused on drayage trucks that are going back and forth right here in California. You're right. We cannot mandate anything for out-of-state trucks. We would never beat our head against that wall. But hopefully what happens is, certainly with the Biden administration, we will be more in sync on what this means. I know there is a lot of hope, in particular for hydrogen fuel cell trucks to be the answer for long haul trucking. There are still some questions about battery electric for long haul, but fuel cell, I have talked to two of the major truck stop stations, service station networks in the United States, and they are bullish on hydrogen. Both of them committed to themselves, but they told me that they had a commitment to have at least one hydrogen pump at every one of their truck stops across. That's a game changer that is driven by the market, not by us, not by the federal government. These truck stop companies see that this could be the answer on a going forward basis. So we're very excited about that. Obviously, California is in the lead for the United States on hydrogen infrastructure. It's still way behind the battery electric infrastructure. We have something like 45 to 50 stations in California today. That number will just about double in this year, in 2021, and will just continue to grow beyond that.
Well, I laid my personal bet on the hydrogen fuel cell probably 25 years ago, so I'm a little disappointed it hasn't advanced quite as quickly as the battery.
I have been as well. When I came onto the board after Arnold Schwarzenegger had talked about the hydrogen highway, I was extremely disappointed at how little had been done in relation to the hype
Yes.
that he had made. So we were even then behind the curve. When I came on the board, I was surprised to find out that we didn't even have a standard for pumping hydrogen like you do for gasoline. And there wasn't one at the federal level. So we actually got money from the federal government to combine with our funding to set a standard. You see at the pump for gasoline, the weights and measures sticker. Yep. That sticker, there was nothing like that for hydrogen. So it took about 2 years to set that standard, and the California standard is now the national standard. And so now you can have one of those little weights and measures stickers to make it official that you're not being cheated at the pump.
I actually started my career as a service station inspector at the South Coast Air District, so I know exactly what you're talking about. So let's change this up just a little bit, and still speaking about the board and where you see them going. Have you noticed during this whole COVID response period a major change in emissions, or any change in emissions that might give the board pause to reevaluate its approach to emission reduction strategies?
It's been very interesting. We've had total vehicle activity drop by almost 60% last spring. So this is all the data that we have so far, that we've collected so far, is just through the second quarter last year. So we have a lag, but 60% total vehicle activity went down. It went down by 60%, but truck traffic was still 75 to 90% of normal. So you can see, so passenger vehicle was way down. For the overall to be 60% down, the truck traffic was a little bit down, and we know that as a result, truck traffic is a big contributor to our air pollution, because on some measures our air pollution did not drop that much. In fact, ozone, there was an initial air quality improvement, but in the South Coast, we still had high levels of ozone in the second quarter last year. So it's clear that the trucks and the ships, because there were a lot of ships that were offshore during the second quarter last year, contribute a significant amount to what we have. That's our running theory as of right now. Again, we'll need more data for the rest of the year, 2020, to be able to figure out if that's the case. But that's what it's looking like right now, and that's troubling on any number of levels. But it also helps us to focus. I personally have always been focused on the trucks because of where I live,
Yes.
just up the road from the ports, between the ports and the rail yards. Also, as of November, California diesel fuel sales were about 10% higher than the year before. And we know, certainly we have all the port folks here, that this February, the Port of Long Beach handled more than 770,000 TEUs, a 43% uptick. I'm sorry, 4.3% uptick from the same month last year. So we've had, and then in the summer, we had records at both ports in terms of how much traffic they had coming in from the ships. So the goods movement sector has been very robust, even as the passenger vehicle sector has dropped tremendously. So there's much work to do in terms of understanding what happened last year, but also in addressing what we know is an issue. It's these trucks and ships. And last year we did do the onshore power mandate for ships going forward, non-containerized. We did those several years ago. Now the other ship categories will have to have either plug-in or a capture system when they're in the port. So those issues, even as we're waiting to get more data on what happened last year.
Yeah, and I do understand also the South Coast Air Quality Management District is looking at that whole thing, because they were quite surprised with the ozone levels going up, when actually the first couple of quarters it was still depressed with ship traffic and that too.
Yeah.
So there's a thought about what might volatile organic compounds, which are in a lot of the sanitizers and things that folks are using, did that have an effect on it? So that will be interesting, and I know it still takes several months to develop that, but that'll be interesting.
And one other thing later in the year that we had, of course, were the wildfires. We had a record wildfire year, over 4 million acres burned, the most ever in the state of California. It wasn't just up north; it was down here too, and so that's going to enter into the equation as well as we do that analysis for the year.
So, and you just mentioned that you actually live in one of the communities that's impacted by the truck traffic and the supply chain or e-commerce supply routes. Can you tell us about one of the key projects designed to reduce these impacts?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. I think in the fall, I discussed, my focus on the 8,000 trucks that go in and out of the ports that will have to be upgraded somehow by January 1st, 2023, to comply with our truck and bus rule and with their own port clean air standards. I want as many of those 8,000 to be replaced with zero emission trucks. I've said it many times. So for this year, we have something called Project 800. This is for calendar year 2021. We want to have 800, so 10% of those 8,000 trucks converted to zero emission trucks. And we have incentive dollars focused on this effort. We're working with the utility companies on the infrastructure that those trucks will need. We're very, very optimistic because, again, We know that 3 or 4 of the manufacturers are going to have zero emission trucks for sale this year. So this is the first step, the first big step in getting us to zero. We also will have this year a fleet rule, a clean truck fleet rule that we will work on, that will have images of zero emission trucks that need to be sold, that need to be purchased by large fleets in the state of California. Obviously, that will also impact this transition. We have all of our incentive programs, the truck loan program, the Carl Moyer program, the Volkswagen mitigation money from their cheating with their vehicles, the HVIP programs, and we now have the Mercedes cheating in money coming in as well, over $100 million from the settlement on Mercedes-Benz. So we don't know what we're going to spend that money on yet, but I suspect that a good chunk of it will be heavy-duty trucks, because they cheated with diesel, and so we need to address the pollutants that come from diesel. It makes sense to do that with heavy-duty trucks. So we're very optimistic about all of this. The Project 800 was announced in January, and we had a big workshop, and we will continue to be out there promoting it. Very importantly, I mentioned all of the funding programs. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is the money from cap and trade in California, we did not get a budget line item last year for GGRF because we had a bad auction, right, bad cap and trade in May. Well, the 3 auctions we've had since then, so the 3 auctions in this fiscal year, have all been fantastic. So it was a blip, it was a COVID blip back in May, but the auctions, the 3 subsequent auctions, were no less than 95% subscribed, meaning 95 to 100% of the credits were sold, and we're talking about roughly $1.5 billion so far, and we have 1 auction to go. So we are hoping that we will get a greenhouse gas reduction fund budget done here in the next few weeks for this fiscal year, and then obviously in June, when the regular budget is done, we will get another one for the next fiscal year, for 21-22. So the money is coming. The worst case scenario is that this year's just gets folded into next year's, and it all gets done in June. But there is money that we have a wait list for our heavy duty truck programs. So we want to clear that wait list when we get this money in. So I just, for those of you that are following this or are interested in participating, help is on the way.
Yeah, and I do realize, especially with these earlier truck models of zero emission that are coming out, there's limited range. And so I think there's a concern with long range drayage trucks that this is not a solution for them. And so, and obviously the hydrogen is still running behind. So is there a plan to address these long range trucks?
Well, a couple of the 8 manufacturers that I mentioned that are going to come online this year or next year are fuel cell, are hydrogen fuel cell. So those, they're part of the mix as well. And of course, on the hydrogen side, it has to be high capacity fueling because trucks obviously need a lot more fuel than a passenger vehicle does. So we need to make sure we have high capacity pumps for the trucks that isn't necessarily most of the 45 to 50 stations that we currently have. So that's an issue on the hydrogen side. On the battery electric side, folks know their business better than we do, and so we'll take whatever percentage of the 8,000 trucks, drayage trucks that come in and out of the ports that are going to have to be replaced we'll take whoever has the facilities that meet that need. And as I mentioned with Edison, they have already had the 130 trucks or so worth of charging that they've moved ahead on for this year, for 2021, and they're bullish on it, and they expect that there's going to be much more through as the year goes on. The longer term, the longer distance drayage, there are some companies that are looking to do battery electric or fuel cell drayage trucks, zero emission trucks, by this year, that are out in the Inland Empire. So again, I'm not familiar with their business model or how they run these trucks, but the Inland Empire is certainly reachable with these zero emission trucks and usable. They certainly believe that they can use zero emission trucks to go back and forth.
Well, another of the measures that are designed to reduce impacts, air pollution impacts in the harbor area, is the upcoming revisions to the Harborcraft rule. Can you tell us what's happening there, please?
It's a big one. We did the at-berth rule last year. I referenced it earlier. Harborcraft is coming this year, and it's got a variety of components, but basically it's more stringent in-use requirements for vessels, initially primarily cleaner combustion, so that they would have to install either cleaner engines and emission controls, or just emission controls, depending on what engine they have and where the technology stands for vessels. Full zero emission operation will be required, though, for ferries by 2026, and excursion vessels would need to be zero emission after 2025. For the majority of vessels, as I said, it would just be an upgrade to the cleanest available federally certified engine, plus for many a retrofit diesel particulate filter, much like we do for trucks. That would be the requirement starting in 2023 and lasting through 2032. And at full implementation, we expect we would have an 85% reduction in PM emissions from these vessels and a 50% reduction in NOx emissions from these vessels relative to where we are today. So it's going to be a big one. It's going to impact all of these vessels, tugboats, et cetera, that are in the harbor. And we'll get more details. It'll probably be around the summer when this regulation comes out. But that's what it's looking like as of now. And it's important for people to know that it's coming. There will be a full, public process. We will continue to take
Okay. Completely switching gears. Let's talk a little bit more about AB 617. We addressed that last year just a bit, but it's designed to reduce emissions impacts on communities, especially those that have had borne a lot of the burden of the pollution. The districts continue to identify new communities and are developing emission reduction plans, but funding is lacking. How can the Air Resources Board help districts in implementing this important legislation?
Yeah, we just approved 3 more, by the way, last month.
Right. Lengthy hearing.
We're up to 13 hours. We're up to 15 now of these communities statewide, and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund comes into play here because we get the money for this, and the fact that we haven't gotten an appropriation yet for this fiscal year is an issue. It's not going to be a problem. We're good for it, but it's caused some consternation at the air district level, and we're in partnership with the air districts on this program. and not just on the funding to do it, to do the meetings and the planning, et cetera, but also on the implementation, which there's incentive dollars specific to these communities to help them clean up. It doesn't have to be the source, although that would be great, of most of the pollution. It could be other sources that are in that same community, so that the net is a reduction in pollution in those communities. That's the point. And I think it's really important to say there is nothing like this program that is targeting local communities at the micro scale in the world. There's nothing like it in the United States. There's nothing like it in Europe. There's nothing like it in Asia. It is a first of its kind structure to get community input, to focus on a community that is heavily impacted, and then address those issues, those air pollution issues, for them. So we have a blueprint of what we do. It's available online. You can see all the different things that we do with 617. We fund community air protection grants across the state. We have outreach about supplemental environmental projects that can be done. We improve accessibility of monitoring and emissions data so that the community can see what's going on in their neighborhood. Very importantly for the Southern California port complex, there is one of these communities in Wilmington, San Pedro area. There's another one where I live in Southeast LA along the 710 corridor. And there's another one just next to us in East LA around the rail yards. So we have 3 right here in the main corridor. And then there's another one out in the Inland Empire where there's a lot of goods movement going on out there too. So we very much are well represented in this process. And each one of these communities is going to seek out the task force, the working group that puts this together, puts their plan together, and we approve it at CARB. And then obviously we commit to funding and supporting whatever it is that they're seeking to improve their air quality. That has impacts on the ports, has impacts on the trucking, it has impacts on the rail yards, all the goods movement sector, because they're right next to it. And there's going to need to be some mitigation in some way. So all the things we've talked about previously about cleaner trucks and going to zero absolutely helps with 617, because every one of those cleaner vessels, trucks, yard equipment contributes to reducing the pollution for those neighboring communities. We also have some alternative plans. So, for example, with trucking, we can do increased enforcement in those areas for idling and other things. Truck routes through those communities, redirecting the trucks so they're not going directly through the community on their way to pick up or drop off their load. And that's not just something here in Southern California. The South Fresno 617 community has issues with this. I mentioned the Inland Empire. There's another one in West Oakland, just outside of the port complex up there, that is having these issues. And so to the extent that we identify solutions in any one of these places, we want to replicate them in the others, whether they're 617 or not. And it's kind of a lab we're doing here, where we're identifying solutions and we want to replicate those in other places. There's no reason to wait for a 617 community, and maybe that will help the increasing number of 617 communities and the pressure to have more 617 communities if we're able to just take solutions and apply them.
Yeah, and we do hear a lot more communities now trying to put their hat in the ring for being designated as an AB 617 community. I think South Coast actually has 5 of those.
It has the most.
Yes, it has about a third of all of the communities in the state. So that's a lot for the South Coast to take on. It's clear that in these communities, as you just pointed out, a lot of that is the goods movement and the trade corridors that are impacting those communities rather than stationary sources, which is where the South Coast is limited in its authority. So it's kind of interesting the way 617 is set up, because the districts have to implement these plans, and yet the sources that may be affecting these communities are not even within their authority. So how is the air resources?
That's why we're
Right.
part of the process. We're there every step of the way in every one of these 617 communities. We have staff dedicated to this process, so we are in every one of these meetings. Hopefully, in most cases, we're collaborating well.
Yeah.
Sometimes not so well, but we are together, and so we're hearing what they're hearing. And if the issues are mobile sources, then that gets included in the plan, and we commit. We're the ones who approve the plan, so we commit our share of the work on those issues. And we also have, on the mobile side, we also have other regulations that are happening even as we're doing 617, right? We're doing statewide regulations on locomotives that's coming up. We have transportation refrigeration unit regulations that's coming up soon. The advanced clean truck fleets, which I alluded to or referenced earlier, that's coming up soon. That includes drayage trucks. We have the yard equipment with forklifts and other equipment. That's coming up soon. And the cargo handling equipment, separate from forklifts, that is coming up soon. So all of these contribute to reducing emissions at that localized level. We just did one last month on that long meeting that you referenced on ag burning. In rural communities, that's going to make a big difference to regulate and then eventually in the next few years eliminate ag burning in rural communities. That will do a great deal to clean up the air in those agricultural rural 617 communities.
So I'm going to take a look over, and I don't know if folks have been chatting or sending questions to Henry so that we can address some of these others. Let's see, I think we actually touched on most of what is in our chats. And I encourage anyone else that has any questions to please put them in the chat so we can do that before I do my big wrap up question. And so let's see. I see here, would you support taking long haul drayage trucks out of the drayage truck proposed rule until technology for 400 mile trips is there or more mile trips is there for ZEVs?
I haven't seen the fleet rule yet, the draft fleet rule, so I don't know that isn't already there. So we'll see what staff comes up with, and we'll react to it. I think once we have the commercially available hydrogen fuel cell trucks, we'll know more. And like I said, that's going to be this year or next year, and so we will have a better sense of their capacity going forward. We know with battery electric that's not there yet, but maybe there'll be some breakthroughs in that regard as well. As I mentioned earlier, it seems like hydrogen fuel cell is the likely solution to long haul.
Right. I'm going to revise this one question that came in just a bit because you already touched on a lot of these regulations, but I hear from the Port of LA and Long Beach, they share the same environmental goals as CARB and want to continue to be the leader in reducing emissions voluntarily through their Clean Air Action Plan. Technology is still in the infancy and very expensive. And the 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update predicts $14 billion for zero emission transition. Some say Air Resources Board does not want to wait for the technology to become mature, and others like South Coast believe low emission hybrid alternative fuels are reasonable alternatives in order to hit the state's implementation plan. What are your thoughts on how to address this issue, and how do we pay for this transition?
Well, I'm really glad that the money issue came up, because the ports last March approved a very feeble $10 container fee environmental efforts. And here we are, March of 21, 12 months later, and they are still not even collecting that feeble $10 per container fee to fund those wonderful Clean Air Action Plan goals. So I would love to see the ports both start collecting on that $10. As I testified at that hearing last March, $10 is feeble and not enough. But the fact that they haven't collected it, even as they have record traffic coming into the ports, is extremely disappointing to me personally. And I would like to see them collecting the $10. I'd like it to be higher, but the fact that they're not even collecting that minimal amount is very disappointing, and frankly brings into question their commitment to their Clean Air Action Plan if they're not putting money on the table. We certainly are. In terms of it not being available, again, I've pointed out over and over again, we have 8 manufacturers, major manufacturers, not mom and pop startups, not someone working out of their garage. These are Peterbilt and Volvo and Toyota Hino, and all the big players, and they are all coming online this year and next, and they are taking orders and delivering on them. So the trucks are there. Will it be all of the 14,000, 15,000 drayage trucks that come in and out of the ports? Probably not in the short term, but as many as we get will really move the needle and will drive the marketplace. One thing I didn't mention, and I've seen it on the passenger vehicle side, I haven't seen it on the heavy duty side, but I can't imagine there isn't a connection here. UBS, the Swiss bank, did an analysis of the battery electric passenger vehicles, and their analysis showed price equivalence of a battery electric light duty vehicle to an internal combustion light duty vehicle by 2024. That's just around the corner. And so if battery prices are that equivalent by 2024 for light duty, you can extrapolate that for heavy duty it'll be right around the same time. So we are really on the cusp of something big here on the price side. We know the technology is there, but on the price side, I think we're going to see some major breakthroughs. And to the extent that we're subsidizing and purchasing the purchase of these trucks, the price is just going to come down more. So we've seen this already happen on the solar side. We're seeing it currently with the light duty side. With just in a couple of years, we'll have price equivalence. And then I think on the heavy duty side, they'll be right there as well. In addition to the hydrogen fuel cells, I always want to make sure we're talking about both at the same time, because they are both part of the solution.
And I think especially for the initial purchases, those incentives are going to be really key, and set them at the right amount, because then those folks, as the technology develops and you see more coming off the assembly, they start assembly lines instead of prototype kind of thing. Those prices drop. So the first people are going to be taking the bigger hit as far as financially. So
Absolutely, and that's why we're subsidizing them so heavily. The other thing I would say, and I reference the regulatory benefit of not having us uh, bugging you with zero emission trucks, is also because of that, because there's no regulatory lifespan on these vehicles, you can run a zero emission truck into the ground, right? We're not going to come at you in 5, 10 years and say, oh, that's not clean enough. You need to have a cleaner truck, or even, for the port's own Clean Air Action Plan standards, those trucks, they won't have to be replaced. So you get a much longer return on your investment for buying zero than you do for buying any fossil fuel vehicle.
I like this question here. What initiatives have come from the local AB 617 steering committees that have caused CARB to change or reassess its policies? And I guess that, have you seen anything that can be broadly applied?
There are three that we're working on currently. One isn't CARB, but it was part of their plan, so we have to do it. The first I've referenced earlier, which is the enforcement side. We have a whole primer on truck enforcement, goods movement enforcement, that local jurisdictions can take up. So obviously, we're a statewide agency. We only have so many enforcement staff. CHP helps us on the enforcement side, but even they're out there protecting the roads and safety, et cetera. They're not just looking out for dirty trucks. So one way that we can augment that at the local level is to have local jurisdictions, whether it's the city or the county, take up the same obligations, the same regulations, adopt them as an ordinance, and then they can enforce the same regulations at the local level. And the benefit to them is if they write a citation, they get to keep the money. So there is a mechanism that this is something that came out of this process, that we realized that there was a commonality in a lot of these 617 communities. And so we wanted to empower them at the local level to supplement what we do on the enforcement side. That's one. Two, the border area, the Imperial Valley side and the San Diego side. This was triggered by the Imperial Valley 617 community, but it applies obviously on the San Diego side. There's a lot of border issues in terms of pollution coming over from Mexico into these neighboring communities, and they wanted to engage the Mexican side more. And so we have done that. We've started regular meetings with legislators and agency folks from Baja California Norte to work with us on identifying things, monitoring, other low-hanging fruit that we can work on together to clean up on their side, but that benefits us on our side. And that one came from a 617 conversation. And the third one is the one I said isn't really ours, is pesticides. We don't do pesticides, but pesticides get into the air, right, when they're sprayed. So we are working with the Department of Pesticide Resources, DPR, which is also a sister agency within California EPA with CARB. So we are working with them on how we can improve notification initially, and hopefully some regulation down the road, notification for residential communities that are adjacent to agricultural lands where the pesticides are being sprayed. At the very least, they need to know when it's going to happen so they can take whatever actions they want to take in regard to that. So those are three examples right out of the gate after our first year of SERPs. These are things that we plucked out from those, and there will be many, many more to follow, I'm sure. Again, I see it as a lab where we're learning these things. These issues are being identified, and then we're taking them statewide.
Well, thank you for that. I know we've gone well over an hour with you, and I could keep going forever because this is a great conversation. But we'll just give you one last little follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
How can we ensure that while we are reducing emissions and imposing regulations on the industry, that we don't have a negative effect on the economy?
Yeah, and this is a question we get asked. Actually have economists at CARB. People are surprised to know that. We have staff economists. We have an obligation under state law to do an analysis of the economic impact of what we do, and the economic benefit has to outweigh the cost of the regulation. Every regulation we do. And so that is part of our analysis, much like the analysis. It is baked in to our process. In fact, on a couple of occasions, I don't recall what the regulations were. We had proposed regulations where those two things were too close, and we ended up not doing the regulation because, if the cost and the benefit are roughly the same, then what are we doing? So there have been instances where we have not proceeded with proposed regulations because that didn't work out. Then, obviously, then we have to figure out another way of doing the regulation that reduces the impact to get the benefit. And those adjustments were made. So we do have this obligation. We do take it very, very seriously. One thing that we've started to think about more, which we didn't do when I came onto the board, is the economic benefit to the state of California of being a driver on some of this green technology. We are currently the Michigan of zero-emission vehicles in California. A lot of that is Tesla, but we also have BYD and other manufacturers here in California who are producing these vehicles or parts for these vehicles or batteries for these vehicles. And so we've really moved the needle there. I referenced earlier Lithium Valley. We think that's going to be, we and the governor and GoBiz think that's a very promising development that, we stumbled upon. We're just lucky that we have that geothermal activity and all that brine. So if we're able to use that in a way that's economically productive, we're going to do that. So we're now thinking more about the benefits of the economic activity that comes from our regulations, and not just the black and white of the regulation, the impact on the current businesses, and the health impacts, which is traditionally those are the three measures that we normally have looked at. I don't know that we can include the external economic benefit in our calculations by state law, but it is something we're looking at more and more because we do want to see those benefits accrue to the state of California in the long term. Brings investment dollars in, et cetera. So, and as I always say about the things that we do, particularly when it comes to vehicles, there's no disincentive for efficiency. That's what we're looking at, right? The less fuel you burn, in the case of internal combustion engines, the less you're paying for fuel, and that's a good thing. And there's less emissions associated with burning less fuel. And then zero emission, obviously, you don't have that calculation. That calculation is a longer term, cost of ownership type calculation that all of the studies I've seen show that there is a benefit. It's just a matter of how long it takes to see that benefit come to the purchaser, whether that's a trucking company or an individual, or a company that is functioning in California. It will be cheaper for them in the long run to be more efficient.
Well, great. We so appreciate you spending so much time with us today. And I have to say, I look forward to our next update next year.
Just give me a call.
As we keep going. And I know this isn't the last you'll hear from us or our members. I'm sure we will be up at your board meetings or on Zoom, as it were, at this point. But you'll be hearing from us, and we're glad that you are willing at any time to discuss our concerns with us, and look forward to those.
Absolutely. Like I said, I have an open door policy, so anytime.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll turn this back to Henry for any final remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone attending.
Exactly. Francis, again, thank you for help in leading today's discussion. And Hector, again, this seems to be an annual occurrence for us, and we do appreciate your candor and your willingness to meet with us. For our HAIC members, we will post this on YouTube in a week or two, once we get everything put together. And then our next discussion is actually with our commercial courts update, so in about a month. So everyone have a good day, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.